For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. All right, looks like we are live. Matt Man in the house. We've got a good chat going on already. This is going to be a lot of fun, guys. Thanks so much for your patience. I promise you this is going to be worth it. It's another show of Live with Raw Matt. Today, Matt Man and SFT, we're going to be going over some updates, announcements when it comes to the Standing for Truth ministry, as well as dealing with some so-called heat problem arguments. So it's going to be a lot of fun, somewhat technical, definitely share around. Like I said, we've got some good people in the chat. Thanks so much. Looks like, there we go. Redefine Living says, I got Standing for Truth's new book. Awesome, brother. I hope you are enjoying. It is available right now in black and white and in color. Oh, here we go. Super sticker from Angelica Serenity. Thanks so much for the super sticker. Thanks so much for the support. Good to see everybody in the chat. So that being said, I'm glad that it's amazing. It's overwhelming seeing how many of these books are already going out and have already been sold. So it was written as a handbook. Okay. And we, Raw Matt and myself, we are planning an entire series of these handbooks. Okay. So the one we're working on right now is the Young Earth Creation Model Handbook. So we're going to be touching on a lot of things, even pertaining to the so-called global flood heat problem in that book. Okay. Now the color, this one's the color edition. The color editions, as Matt knows, are always a lot more expensive to print. But the black and white one, you can find it on Amazon. Also, check out our Goodreads page. We've got a ton of reviews, ton of good feedback there to find all of our books in one place that can directly take you to the Amazon website as well. Matt, what are a couple of the other things we're working on for the future as well? I know we're working on a Richard Dawkins, Debunking Dawkins documentary video. The handbooks. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Thanks for being here, brother.
No problem. Well, maybe you saw one the other day. I got the editing down for now. We are officially cartoons, so that'll be fun. Now we have our own material. We can basically make a flood video with cartoons now, so that'll be fun. I'm learning how to do all that type of editing, so it's just branching us out even more because it's kind of a shame to always have to use other people's material, right? You kind of go, hey, well, let me find a picture of some water and then download a picture from the internet. Then you're trying to make a video out of still pictures. It's okay, but let's make it more entertaining. People like to visualize things. We learn better visually anyway, so I think that'll take us to the next level as well.
Right. And you know what? We're taking superheroes, which everybody loves, especially kids, right? And we are taking the superhero idea and taking young earth creation and biblical creation, kind of combining them, right? And this is the puts a nice spin on it. I know as a kid, I loved superheroes. So to see young earth creation with a superhero spin to it, I think is pretty cool. But yeah, definitely check out, like I said, once again, Independent Origins Handbook, color and black and white. Lots of good shows as well. Go check the upcoming live stream section of the page and you'll see a ton of debates, ton of interviews. Kicking off with this Wednesday, Praise I Am versus Cygnus Ustis on slavery. The 7th, we've got Mike Ord back on. So what's going to be cool is we've got physical geology versus evolution's deep time with Sal Jardina. Okay, geologist Sal Jardina on the 8th. But we've also got Mike Ord, okay, flood researcher, on the 7th. So we're going to have 2 days going over tons of evidence for the flood, the post-flood ice age, and a question and answer period following each. Okay, so any global flood related questions, geology related questions, we've got 2 days back to back, okay, with 2 highly intelligent flood researchers. So make sure you're here to ask all your questions. Critics and skeptics, make sure you're bringing your objections, and we're going to deal with them. So anyways, that's it for now on announcements and updates. Just make sure you're checking the upcoming live stream section, as we got a ton planned for the future. And I'm updating that as much as I can. God bless you as well, Princess Rainbow. And good to see everybody in the chat. Why don't we get kind of right into it then? Matt, what if you want to introduce the topic, specifically the couple arguments we're going to be dealing with. So go ahead, Matt.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that most people are more curious about how to answer the hardest questions. That's why they come to our channel, right? People like the technical but understandable versions of everything. So I think that our goal is always to dive in as deep as we possibly can to answer the questions that the roughest critic might have. And for the flood, they've given up for pretty much everything. They can no longer say that genetics doesn't prove it. They can no longer say that pretty much anything, except for they go, well, geology does. Geology is where it's debunked, because we see that there's a massive heat problem with the different flood models. And so you saw that with the last debate that was going on. Jordan mentioned all the heat is so much of a problem that it essentially makes the Earth as hot as the sun, or hotter than the sun. So therefore, it can't be true, because radiometric decay or radioactive elements would have eradicated the Earth. They would have made it unlivable and unsurvivable. So we're going to be touching on that. We're going to show that there are multiple flood models. So if, let's say that, for example, you're a Christian and you go, well, I don't know how to answer the heat problem. I didn't even know there was one, maybe. But that's it. But that's what's keeping me from believing. Right? Because let's just say, well, the only thing that makes me not believe anymore is the heat problem. Now, I don't know if that's an actual thing people do, but you guys realize that there are models that exist that don't have any heat problem whatsoever, right? So you can learn about that flood model and then just understand that one and go, I guess that's the model that I'm going to believe in. Because you don't have to believe in the CPT or the hydroplate theory. Those are the 2 models that are attacked the most because they're the most popular. One is by Answers in Genesis, and the other one is by Walt Brown. They're the most famous flood models on Earth. That doesn't mean that there's only 2 flood models. So those are the ones that are attacked the most, because those are the ones that are believed by the most people. It doesn't mean that they're the only ones that exist. So we are going to address those, because those are the critical components for the believer. And they're also the ones that are attacked during debates, right? So if you're going to get in a debate with somebody like Jordan, for example, he's a nuclear engineer and he runs the numbers and he goes, well, let's look at that. Let's see what happens when you're dealing with friction that's moving so quickly. You're basically speeding up radiometric decay rates. What would be the result from that? So what we're going to do today is say, okay, let's say that model is the one that we hold to and we were defending it. How would we defend that model? That's what we do. And that's what makes us kind of unique as well, because we defend other young Earth creationists. Even though it's not our model, we still defend it. And I don't know, it's harder to do, but it's exciting, because it's just another thing for us to learn and study and to get into, because we also want to know which one's true. We don't just go, oh, we like that one. That one's cool. No, you investigate it. You investigate to see which one is true. You don't just believe something. You go where the evidence is. So where is it? Which one's true? So we're going to cover all that today. And we're also going to cover something that McQueen didn't answer, and that was Jordan's critique on the radioactive food that Noah would have had and the water that would have killed him. So
yeah, that's the big one. Yeah, that's a big one we'll be dealing with today, because like I said, we're working on the next handbook that's going to have roughly an entire chapter dealing with the so-called heat problem in detail, that George, Raw, Matt, and myself are going to be contributing to. So the argument that kind of you just laid out is, I would say, the main argument we're going to deal with tonight. And as you said, here on this channel, we've got, I think, about 1,400 videos. To anybody who's new in to this ministry, new to this channel, okay, check the playlist section. I'm constantly updating it. There's nothing in the playlist section you can't find. Every topic pertaining to geology, astronomy, genetics, biology, the global flood, debates, discussions, interviews, it's all there, nice and organized. So please check that out. So that being said, yeah, Matt, why don't we kind of get right into it and start off with the argument from radioactivity and potassium, for example. Did you kind of just want to jump right into that one then?
Oh, we sure could. Yeah, let's do it. All right, so let's start by actually playing what Jordan said, and then you can hear his argument, and then I'll refute it and show you why, one, it's not a problem because it doesn't even exist, and two, if it does exist, why it's still not a problem. Okay, so I will share a picture of this, and then I'll play it in the background. Hopefully everyone can hear it. And turn up the volume, and here we go.
You may not realize this, but your water and food are radioactive. Under normal circumstances, it's not enough to be harmful, but we're not in normal circumstances. For the exact same reason that we need to deal with 2 billion years worth of heat, we have to deal with 2 billion years worth of radiation. Some creationists have suggested that perhaps the flood waters could have shielded Noah and his family from that radiation. Those waters themselves would be radioactive, but we'll just ignore that. No amount of flood water below the boat is going to defend Noah from the food and water he is consuming. So we'll just look at that. The NRC has some statistics on the amount of dose that we get from food and water each year. So multiplying that out, if we accelerate the decay as needed for creationism, Noah would receive 10 lethal doses of radiation every hour straight to his internal organs from just food and water, and that's going to go on for a year. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I am confident he will not survive.
All right, and there you have it. And that is his argument against why, obviously, Noah could not survive, and therefore the flood could not be true, because as you can see, there is no possible way that Noah could have survived it. Okay, so let's break this down. Basically, the friction that's being caused would boil the oceans. That's the first thing he says. And then he's basically saying that accelerated nuclear decay also runs the risk of radiation particles and heating up the ocean so much that it would boil them, and it would throw those particles into the land and they would get into the plants. Jordan is essentially mixing two arguments from two separate models to make the heat problem a bigger issue than it actually is. So let's break this down by first me telling you, for one, catastrophic plate tectonics. The heat from this model comes from friction, from accelerated nuclear decay. So those two things, the rocks grinding across the other rocks, and then happening so quickly that it's causing like a fission, and the nuclear decay is being accelerated quickly, right? So it changes the dates of the rocks. And then number two, we have the hydroplate theory, which is the heat and the pressure which created supercritical water, and then the creation of the super heavy elements that decayed into radioactive particles. So each of the models have two things that create lots of heat during the flood. Jordan combined all of these issues and rolled them into one massive problem where the Earth is hotter than the sun. So this is easily resolved, I think, basically by, you can easily just deny both of those models. I mean, literally, if you were going to debate the guy and you just said, well, I don't follow the hydroplate theory or the catastrophic plate tectonics, can you imagine what he would say? You would literally be like, uh-oh, I didn't plan for that one. But, you know, that's here and there since that has not happened yet. But I would have done that just to throw a curveball at him, a wrench, and then say, okay, well, if the heat is really the biggest issue, then just say you don't believe in the model. Now, Jordan's argument on Noah and potassium is what we're going to get into now, right? Because that's what it is. Potassium-40 is a radioactive element. So basically, you can see that Jordan reached out and grabbed an argument without studying either bananas or the different forms of potassium that exist, nor the different flood models that he's used in the debate, and I'll explain why. Because this is, well, that's what I've noticed anyway. So basically, he's cramming these all into everything to say that there's a massive problem. So let me break this down. Noah basically magically grew modern day hybrid banana fruits. Okay, think about that real quick. Bananas that exist today look like this. You see that? That's a modern day banana on the right. So these are what Noah grew these bananas, because that's what Jordan says. Look at the picture. Jordan thinks Noah was magically growing modern day bananas, and that he would have had these on the ark. It's kind of like, well, no, even these right here on the left weren't. These are more heirloom, but they're still not what Noah would have had. these are modern day inventions. These are created through hybridization to be sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, and pour more nutrients into themselves and concentrate sugars so that they convert from starch to sugar. So that's what you're getting with these things. So first of all, Noah, no, he did not have modern day bananas. So I digress. So anyway, these magical modern day bananas were somehow pulling high doses of radioactive potassium into themselves, even though the elements never existed. How is that possible, right? Because if you're going to go with the hydroplate theory, those elements weren't even formed yet. So what? Noah's out magically farming modern day bananas, and these modern day bananas now have magical elements that don't even exist in them yet? Okay, that makes no sense. So now we're looking at how smart is Noah? Apparently, he's retarded, because he decided to bring bananas with him as a food to survive for a year. Perishable fruit. Think about that real quick. That's like saying, yeah, there's a flood coming. Someone go get me some milk. I need some milk. It's stupid. Noah would have not brought perishable fruit that's only going to last a maximum of 1 month for himself, his family, and all the animals on the ark. But let's just say that this madness literally happened, okay? So Noah brought enough of this magical modern day bananas and fruits and for all the animals to eat. Okay, well, let's see what would have happened if this really did occur. Okay. What you're looking at now is the actual potassium ratio for the abundance of the mineral. So look at number 39. Okay, well, potassium 39 is what? It's stable. It says right there. But yet that's 93.2581% of all the potassium that's on the land today. So we drop down here. What's the other 6%? That's potassium 41. Guess what? That's also stable. It's also not radioactive. That's another 6.7320%. So what are we looking at? We're looking at essentially 93.281% of all potassium that's in nature, just in the form of potassium 39, essentially is not radioactive. That means that 99.988% of all potassium is not radioactive that would have been in the fruit or that's on the fruit. So Noah would have had something that would have had no radiation problems whatsoever. The only radioactive potassium thing that it would have been in it would being potassium 40, which it would have been less than 0.01%. So that's what Noah would have had on the ark with him. So how in the world would this have killed Noah? It wouldn't have, because it's not reality. So that's one. Now, guess what? We eat radioactive foods today, don't we? We know that if you take these bananas and you walk through an airport, it's going to set off the radioactive counter. We know they're radioactive. They don't cause us problems. Why? Because potassium is water soluble, right? So if it's water soluble, that means that when you eat a lot of it, your body gets rid of it, because potassium only stays in the body about 120 grams of it at a time. It's called homeostasis, right? It's like the balancing act of potassium. You need it, and your body's like, okay, I'm at homeostatic control. That's what it's called. So what happens when it goes above that? Your body lowers it, gets rid of it. It's too low, it'll absorb more potassium. So because it's water soluble, if it's toxic, it's going to get rid of it. That's why we can eat as many bananas as we possibly want, and we'll never reach toxic levels, because our body gets rid of it. So even if the bananas were more toxic in this improbable scenario where Noah was magically I don't know, harvesting bananas from the bottom of the ocean while the Noah's flood is going on, and he's pulling up these radioactive bananas and deciding to eat them, it still wouldn't bother him too much because he would urinate the toxic amounts out. So even in the best case scenario for Jordan's argument, it falls apart because he didn't investigate either of the models. Like I'm saying, he didn't look at like, well, let's investigate that. What would happen if Noah was harvesting food? When was he harvesting it? Well, it was before the flood, obviously. He's not harvesting bananas during the flood. So therefore, all of the things that grew before the flood either didn't have the amounts of radiation, being Walt Brown's model, which would have had none, or let's say catastrophic plate tectonics. Well, guess what? Rapid nuclear decay is only occurring during the flood. That means that all food grown before that time wouldn't have it. I don't think Jordan thought about that very much, literally, when he made the argument. It seems pretty logical, right? I mean, your food's not going to have something in it that's not there. So anyway, let's see. He tried to argue that radioactive elements were created at the flood. I don't know. I made notes this time. I never make notes, so I'm not going to be very good at reading from them. Yeah, I mentioned that I don't think Jordan used very much logic because, you know, is he saying that this food was growing under the ocean at the time? Because that's the only possible way that it would have this radioactive material inside of it that he's claiming it would have. Now, so food's out of the way now. Food's blown out of the water. There's no possible way that it would have the radioactive potassium in it whatsoever, because even if it was there, it wasn't there before the flood anyway. So there was, even if there was radioactive elements, it wouldn't have been in high concentrations like he's saying it would. Anyway, sorry, ad popped up. All right. Jordan also says that the ocean water would have been highly radioactive during this time, and that would have been all of Noah's drinking water. I say, what are you talking about? It was raining during this time. Oh, I hear myself. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Are you hearing an echo? Here, just one sec.
I did, but it's gone. I'm good. Okay.
Good.
So basically, Noah would have gathered the rainwater to drink. And guess what? He wouldn't have been drinking salinated ocean water to begin with without some kind of a filtration. So he would have been reliant on the rain. It rained for 150 days. So we're talking about he had massive amounts of rain to distribute and to save. So rain is basically distilled water in it. The only way that rain can be radioactive is things like the when it's in the atmosphere. The radioactive chemicals have to be in the atmosphere to it be absorbed and then be in the clouds so that the rain can grab a hold of it and it can fall down as radioactive. We're talking about the radioactivity being created at the bottom of the ocean. So it would be in the ocean, not in the upper atmosphere where the rain's going to be collecting. Remember, rain has a small amount of TDS to it, which means it's total dissolved solids. So therefore, rain can only fall back to Earth if it has a couple things in it. One of those things can be dust. It can have a little bit of a rock in it or dust, and it will have enough of an element to fall back to the Earth. It could also have bacteria in it, small amounts of it, of course, but that's all it requires to fall back to Earth. So basically, it's extremely filtered and distilled and very clean water. So you would have to have an upper atmospheric radiation leak for it to be in the upper atmosphere where the water would actually be able to get into the rain to cause the problems. Being at the bottom of the ocean would cause no problems except for in the ocean itself. So I guess in closing, why would Noah take bananas? One, that's completely stupid. That's the stupidest food to take. Noah would have not done it in the first place because he's not retarded. And even if he was retarded, God told him what to do. God sent him the animals. God was telling him what to do. So God probably told him what foods to take. I know that it says in scripture specifically, go and gather all of the seeds from the flora, right? So he knew to gather a bunch of different things. He wasn't taking fresh produce like that. There's no reason to do that for massive amounts of time. And that's just basic logic. So bananas weren't there. That's just ridiculous. Seeds for the banana probably were, but he wasn't bringing fresh perishable. And why would there have even been radiation? It hadn't even been created yet in the model that he's literally invoking there's being too much heat. So what does he not understand the model? He's literally complaining that there's too much heat based on the creation of super heavy elements But yet at the same time, he's denying that the model says that there were no heavy elements, no radioactive elements before the flood. So which is it? You're going to make a complaint about the model, but you're not going to actually listen to what the model has to say. Okay, straw man away, man, whatever. Let me see. Rain, not radioactive. That's the ocean that would have been. He's not drinking the ocean. Potassium, even in radioactive form, doesn't matter. It's all water soluble. You can only hold on to 100 and, oh, what was that?
Oh, no, nothing. You're good.
Okay, cool. 120 grams of it at a time. That's it. You don't hold on to more. So extra radiation isn't going to do much. So basically, that's it. I guess, like, I just don't understand what's hard to grasp about those models. He's using the only aspects he can find that cause a problem for the model, but he's ignoring the other aspects of it. That's what I see. So we can get into limestone and stuff later, but like I said, if he's basically grasping at straws. He's saying, you know, radioactive decay is why Jordan or Erica or whoever, they don't want to accept that the global flood is true when there's multiple answers for it, or not even listening to those very flood models themselves. It's kind of like, it's a stretch, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, we have 99 pieces of this puzzle, but I can't find that one, so it's obviously not a puzzle.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It's a double standard too, since they are constantly wrestling with questions from their own model. Even the starting position of their model with chemical evolution and abiogenesis, right? If the runners at the starting line of a race, if they were to fall over and die before the race starts, then there's no race to discuss. And that's where they're sitting essentially when it comes to universal common ancestry, is they don't have an answer for the initial, you know, first reproducing cell. So, but then there's this double standard where, well, you've got all this heat, and as I think we've demonstrated, we've got a number of great solutions for it. A lot better solutions for the so-called heat problem than they have for the origin of life, or for genetic degeneration, mutation accumulation, and natural selection's limits in removing these low impact mutations, molecular clocks, all of this data that really demonstrates that universal common ancestry cannot be true. But then they just want to have this double standard and focus on a line of evidence that they think is a problem for the global flood. Real quick, I'll touch on a couple things that came to mind too.
Sure.
We got a super chat here. Raymond, thank you so much for your support, for your super sticker. Like I always say, you guys are the life and blood of this channel. Your amazing support is why we're able to pretty well do this full time, put out books all the time, videos, interviews, discussions. Matt, scroll up for yourself if you want in the live chat. Just a recommendation from our sister in Christ, Angelica. But if you want to just look at that privately. And Jordan in the chat. So Jordan, good to see you. I like Jordan. I think he makes for some good debates. He's been on the channel a number of times. 5 or 6 times, I think, for some of my favorite debates. So when it comes to arguments, you know, that's what we're dealing with is the arguments, not the person. I think Jordan is a lot of fun, and he makes for some good debate. So one thing I'll say when it comes to this whole issue as well is the evidence for accelerated nuclear decay that we have, okay, directly in the rocks themselves. For example, the radio halos and the fission tracks, okay? We could also get into helium, but I did get into helium quite a bit in a video that I did maybe a month ago on accelerated nuclear decay. Is my audio coming in okay, Matt?
Yeah, I heard you good.
Okay. So when it comes to, so I want to deal with fission tracks, radio halos, okay? So what these are anyways, a lot of people have this confusion as to what they are, why they demonstrate the necessity of a period or periods of accelerated nuclear decay. Well, what they are is microscopic areas of damage, okay, that are found directly in the rocks, directly within the rocks themselves, okay? This is observable. This is empirical. It is best explained by accelerated nuclear decay because the observed uniformitarian processes, okay, cannot actually explain these scars. These scars, okay, there is an abundance of these scars of this damage found in granite rock formations all around the world, okay? And when it comes to the fission tracks, for example, the damage done through these fission tracks, it results when heavy unstable atoms of uranium-238, they spontaneously split with, by the way, a single fragment, okay, being capable of producing a significant track of damage within the crystal structure, okay? And fission tracks in general tell us clearly that large scale acceleration of nuclear decay has occurred in the past. So what I find is a lack of response and rebuttal, okay, in my experience doing these debates, to the observable evidence within the rocks themselves that nuclear decay has been accelerated in the past, okay? They ignore these lines of evidence and they commit what's called a red herring, because then they'll say, well, okay, but what about all this heat that would have been generated? What about all of this radiation? Okay, all of this heat that would have melted the crust, this radiation that would have killed Noah, killed the ark animals, okay, essentially boiled the oceans. Okay, we'll deal with that, okay? But it's a red herring in the fact that they don't want to deal with the observable evidence that we have in the present, okay, in the rocks themselves that accelerated decay had happened. But an important point to consider, okay, is that if there was not supercooling during, let's say, creation and the flood, depending which model you're looking to, because depending on the model, you may or may not have accelerated decay at creation and the flood, or just the flood, okay? So it depends what model you're looking at. But let's say if there was not supercooling going on, okay, then this damage, these scars that we find directly in the rocks, they wouldn't be present. We wouldn't find them, as massive amounts of heat that we've covered numerous times here would have actually obliterated these lines of evidence. They wouldn't exist. They wouldn't exist. Now, I want to cover a line of evidence that I believe is an obvious one and a very strong and plausible solution to this whole heat problem, okay? And make your thoughts as well on this, because I think you're going to like this one. We had Joseph Hubbard talk about this very briefly a few weeks ago, okay? But as you know, Matt, there's been fascinating research, okay, into the production of coal and oil. Just refuel real quick, okay? We know that natural oil, gas, and coal have all been produced in a matter of days to weeks, okay? In a matter of days when it comes to coal, weeks when it comes to oil, gas. Now, to produce coal and oil quickly, though, okay, as we all know, okay, there is a process that requires heat and pressure. And tests have actually been done that show with the more heat, okay, the more heat you have, the faster production of coal, oil, and natural gas you're going to get. So if the world's massive deposits of coal and oil are indeed the result of the global flood, okay, then it is highly plausible that that mechanism, okay, that process, a chemical and physical process, okay, responsible for this massive production of coal and oil was heat, which we have a lot of the heat being produced and generated as a result of the flood, okay? Catastrophic plate tectonics, okay, meters per second movement of the plates, of course, is going to result in a lot of heat due to the friction. Okay, this is why I constantly point out that to begin with, heat is a feature and not a bug, because you need that heat to get the plates moving anyways. If you look to the HPT model, hydroplate, you've got the water, okay, that are lubricating these plates for easier movements, easier sliding. So that reduces some heat right off the bat. Okay, and you can touch on that in a bit. But I want to point out that The global flood model, okay, this worldwide flood, the Genesis flood, provides the perfect conditions. And what I find fascinating is this is all in line with theology as well. Okay, the doctrine of God's foreknowledge. Okay, and forward thinking. We see forward thinking processes in our genetics, in biology. We also see it in geology. We see it as a result of the flood. Okay, so the heat needed to produce coal and oil quickly was generated by the global flood itself. Okay, and the heat would be connected to a physical and chemical process. Joseph Hubbard pointed that out, how important this physical and chemical process is that actually leads to the rapid production of huge amounts of coal and oil. Okay, so I want the audience to consider this. There is a very strong connection between the rapid formation of coal, oil, and then heat and pressure. Heat and pressure, okay, being components and features of the global flood. So, and the atheists, they'll look to today, right? The present is the key to the past. No, the pre-flood world we know would have been 90% green, highly tropical. The real estate's been completely rearranged because of the flood. We're living in a totally different environment, in a totally different world today. The pre-flood world would have been 90% green. Today, when we look at the world, it's 90% water as a result of the flood. Okay, so that means, okay, the pre-flood world would have been the perfect battery necessary to what? To absorb or suck up most of the heat generated from the global flood that the critics say is such a huge problem for us. No, it's a feature. It's not a bug. And it's also necessary to produce what we see today in terms of natural oil, gas, coal. We can get into limestone, which requires a chemical process that can result due to the features of the flood. Okay. This also explains how we can get all this massive amounts of coal and oil that we find in the earth today that the evolutionists or uniformitarians want to assume took millions of years, right? But we see it today. We see the production of this today in real time. We also know that plants absorb a lot of heat and also absorb a lot of toxins. Okay, it's the evolutionist that says these fossil fuels were formed over millions of years from the remains of dead organisms. Think about that, the remains of dead organisms. They'll say coal was produced from dead trees and other plant material. Okay, if the pre-flood world was 90% green and we got billions of fossils today, the pre-flood world was more diverse, okay, biologically speaking. Well, you've got, once again, the perfect conditions for a massive amount of plant material and dead biological organisms, marine organisms for heat and pressure to assist in producing coal, natural gas, oil. Okay. We can also get into limestone, of course. And this is based on observable evidence of what we know in the fossil record, being how incredibly diverse it was. So all of that was there, okay? That's why the pre-flood world, when you look at the bigger picture, the pre-flood world was the perfect battery to absorb the majority of that heat, to absorb at least most of the heat, Matt, for there to now not be a heat problem. Because it doesn't have to absorb all the heat. Enough heat where there is now not a heat problem, quote unquote, that is going to kill Noah, kill the ark animals, absolutely melt the crust, okay, so on and so forth. So, yeah, what are your thoughts? I could go on and on and on because this really goes back to the pre-flood world, which we have discussed in great detail in many past shows. So what are your thoughts on that? Is the pre-flood world, what we know about the pre-flood world, is that the perfect battery to suck up or absorb a lot of this heat produced during the flood, Matt? Oh, you're on mute, brother.
Thanks. Well, if we look into the past ourselves and we look at the sheer amounts of plant material that has been fossilized, and we see the sheer size of how big the flora was, we know that everything was massive. We also know that there's massive amounts of oil still underneath the ground that had to come from biological material, mostly plants. When we're in space today and we look at Earth, we see only three colors, really. We see green, we see blue, and we see desert and sand. Well, before the flood, everything was tropical. So you're looking at just green and blue. So if it was green everywhere, and you've got grass and massive amounts of plants everywhere, and you've got higher amounts of oxygen, you have massive plants everywhere. And everywhere was good, because when we look at the poles, whether or not you believe the Pangea or the continents drifted to where they are, regardless, the poles, when you go underneath the ground and you look at the material that was there, it was tropical as well. So we're talking about a world that was entirely tropical, and plants being massive are a great heat sink as well because of carbon in the atmosphere. So basically what you're looking at is massive amounts of plants to deal also with a lot of the heat. Now, how do we know plants can grow this way? Well, we've put them in hyperbaric biodomes and biochambers, and we've grown them under what we know about the past in general. For one experiment, we took it and we increased the magnetism, and the plants grew almost twice as large. We did another one where they grew it just in oxygen, and the oxygen itself was a massive conductor for not just insects because they breathe through their skin, but also the plants, because plants also breathe in a very unique way. And then we've also done it using frequency, which was another amazing one. Matter of fact, you guys can go and buy this for yourself. Let's say that you have a massive garden and you want your garden to grow faster and to produce more fruit. That's doable by simply adding frequency, and it's called sonic bloom. A farmer that was a scientist actually discovered that when birds were chirping an hour before the sun was coming up, there was a particular frequency that was being released that allowed the stomata on the bottom of the leaf to allow the plant to start breathing in oxygen in the morning. And the more they heard the frequency, the more oxygen they would intake. So basically what he did is he found that same frequency was available not just in bird chirps, but also in some classical music. So he replicated the frequency as much as he could in other sounds, and he implemented it into something called sonic bloom, and he played it to his crops and fields, and he noticed that they grew 3 times the size. He grew it to tomato plants that grew massive. And a matter of fact, it works for pretty much everything. So trees are one of the most lucrative things you can own, especially a black walnut tree, because about 30 years after you plant one, they reach maturity and they sell for about $15,000 to $30,000 for each tree. So when you can make something like that grow faster, there's a lot more money to be made. He found that playing the frequency of sonic bloom to these trees allowed them to reach maximum maturity in only 15 years. So that's incredible. So we have multiple scenarios for the reasons that these plants were growing to this extreme rate before the flood. And when we look into the past, we see these gigantic flora everywhere on Earth. So we have multiple reasons to believe that the pre-flood world was tropical, and it was entirely different than the planet that we see today. It was vastly green, and it was subtropical everywhere. So
exactly, which is why it is the entirety of the pre-flood world. What we know about it would have then been the perfect battery to suck up and absorb most of this heat. And it is the uniformitarians, as I pointed out, that would also agree that coal is formed from dead trees, right? And other plant material. You got a pre-flood world that's 90% green with this giant flora, these giant organisms, right? All of this biodiversity, the dead marine organisms as a result of the global flood that can help with oil and gas formation to begin with. And the uniformitarians will even point out the fact that the increased pressures of heat resulting from the overlying rock would have transformed the decomposed matter to coal or oil. Well, if we're looking for increased pressures and increased amounts of heat, well, what's funny, Matt, is we've got these evolutionists, these critics that keep pointing to what? A heat problem. Oh, no problem. Not a bug, a feature, a necessity, okay, to produce and form what we see today anyways in terms of coal, oil, gas, and so on and so forth, right? It was all there in the pre-flood world, okay? So that combined with the number of other solutions that we've talked about, okay? The fact that a lot of that heat would have been moved around during the movement of the plates, okay? And subduction friction, okay, the heat generated could also be a way to accelerate nuclear decay, right? It's all it's all in line. It's all one big model. And any other heat that's just dumped into space. Now, anybody can look to the hypercane model. Anybody can look to the massive amount of water that would have been on the earth, miles and miles of water that would have been on the earth at the time of the global flood, that could have shielded Noah, shielded the ark animals from the excess radiation and the heat. Okay, and the fact that these supersonic steam jets would have taken most of the heat up into space, all these number of solutions, okay? They can make assumptions, okay, and come up with some numbers that say that these aren't going to work. For one, I haven't seen any numbers based on correct assumptions pertaining to the pre-flood world and just how tropical and green it was, combined with all of these solutions, okay? So, yeah, what are your thoughts, brother?
I mean, if people are really looking for like an answer to each particular one, right? How many young Earth creation scientists are there? There's not many of us, right? So we're dealing with people that are specific. A lot of young Earth creationists are into genetics, or maybe into biology, or into paleontology and geology. You know, very few might be nuclear engineers being able to run the different numbers. Let's test what it's going to be like for this model in particular to produce what's going on in this area. Is accelerated nuclear decay happening worldwide at exactly the same time? Or is it happening slowly over the entire year process of really what's going on? Or is it happening in one area at one particular time? What's going on? Is it more Walt Brown's model, where the radioactive elements created at the flood, or before, during creation? You can almost take your pick. What you're saying is that, you mentioned it earlier, not here, but you probably should, would be like a guy shooting a bullet or a gun at rocks. We see the evidence that the rocks were shot, right? So we go, wow, okay, obviously somebody shot them. But critics come along and go, well, that happened millions of years ago. Well, what do you mean? I mean, clearly the rocks haven't been shot recently because we don't see them being shot ever, right? But we look around and every rock has been shot by somebody multiple times, and we don't see any more people shooting rocks. So what's going on? Obviously, it happened in the past. When did it happen? That's the difference. We perceive it one way, they perceive it another.
And not to mention the warming of the oceans, okay, is the best explanation for the ice age that we know existed on this planet, right? Because the evolutionists, the uniformitarians, they got a number of hypotheses as to what created or resulted in the necessary conditions for an ice age, or obviously multiple ice ages for the uniformitarian. But no, the flood itself and the consequences of the flood, the ripple effect of the flood, the heat, okay, being produced, a lot of it being absorbed by the oceans as a result, warming the oceans once again, can explain the ice age. The heat can explain the coal, the oil, the natural gas, can help in explaining the limestone formation seen around the globe. I mean, this is all features of the flood. And I keep saying that because the evolutionists want to say that it's a bug, it's a problem. I mean, everything that we've been discussing shows that no, the heat was helpful in terms of producing and explaining a lot of what we see today. Not to mention going all the way back to the fact that we've got observed, and I don't want to keep harping on this because a lot of people, I'm going to share a screen on this actually. So let me see. I've got a quote here And you can look at Andrew Snelling's paper on this, because they always want to point to Andrew Snelling, who came up with some numbers, said apparently there's no explanation for this. This is a major problem. When yet he's the one who pointed out, I'm going to share a screen real quick. He's the one who pointed at you can look at his paper from himself. Or do I got the book around here? So there's a book, Rock Solid Answers, okay, where they point out that since radio halos and fission tracks are obliterated, okay, at relatively low temperatures, if there had been a heat problem due to accelerated radioactive and nuclear decay, then we should not find radio halos and fission tracks in the rocks today, but we do. And Snelling pointed that out too. So sure, there was a lot of heat produced, okay, a lot of radiation produced as a result, okay. Now we can take these lines of evidence that we find directly in the rocks that suggest periods or a period of accelerated nuclear decay, okay, and we can come up with a variety of plausible solutions given the assumptions of the pre-flood world and a Genesis starting point as to how a lot of that heat could have been removed and absorbed. And we've got, 10 to 20 roughly, ways to counterbalance the heat. And people think that all the heat needs to be absorbed. No, just enough of it needs to be absorbed. Just enough of it needs to be taken out into space. We also don't know the temperature. Matt, if you want to touch on this, if you want, but we also don't know the temperature of the core of the Earth in the pre-flood world. A lot of that heat could still be in the core today. There's a variety of different heat sinks that can take up a lot of the heat. Doesn't have to take up all the heat, but just enough of the heat. So I find that quoting Andrew Snelling without quoting all of Andrew Snelling is a quote mine, because he's not saying that the global flood is false. The heat problem falsifies the global flood model. No, he's acknowledging there's a problem. The temperatures are high, but hey, listen, we've got some solid evidence for accelerated decay. We wouldn't actually have this evidence if there was a heat problem to the point where the global flood could not be possible. No, because we have the observable evidence, but the global flood was also a thing of the past, okay? Two incredibly important events in the history of this universe, Matt. What are they? Creation and the flood. They're unrepeatable, unobservable, okay? We weren't there, but that's where we can come up with plausible hypotheses and solutions into, hey, how could a lot of this heat been absorbed? How could a lot of this heat been removed? So what are your thoughts on that, brother?
Think about it from the perspective of what our model would say. Something killed all the fish, right? Something killed the aquatic life. What was it? It was obviously the heat, right? So sure, there's definitely heat. It's killing all the aquatic life. We don't have megalodons, do we? I'm not sure if we have giant megalodons swimming around. So they're gone. They're somewhere. The aquatic dinosaur-like creatures that were in the pre-flood world are now gone. That's because the flood obviously destroyed them. How is a flood going to kill aquatic creatures? You can't push all of them on the beach, right? So obviously something killed them. Well, heat killed them. That's pretty simple, right? So,
Right.
It seems pretty logical that something killed the fish, because when we look in the molecular clocks in the DNA, we see a bottleneck happen to everything. It didn't just happen to land life and to humans. It happened to aquatic life as well. So we have a genetic bottleneck in all life at the exact same time. What does that sound like to you? It's the global flood. It's the only thing that was global that we can restart it. You can't get a volcano in Europe killing megalodon shark in the Pacific. You know what I mean? So obviously the global flood is true, and we see it in the genetics. We just don't know how to exactly explain what flood model is true. We don't know. There's multiple flood models. They could all be wrong. I'll say it. We don't know. We're going with what we see, just like evolutionists do. They go, why are there aquatic seashells on the top of Mount Everest? We say it's because the whole world was flooded, and at the end of the flood, the mountains were formed. They crushed and they brought it up. So that's why we see it. They said, no, it happens slowly over millions of years. That's all. We have a different perspective on how we view the ancient past. We both have evidence. We view it differently. Go ahead.
And a lot of people say, I saw someone in the chat, good question, you know, why do we have accelerated nuclear decay, you know, at one point in time and not, you know, all throughout history? Well, like I said, we've got two special events in the history of this universe, special creation, the creation event, the global flood. Okay. The global flood and the resulting meters per second movement of the plates, subduction, friction, the heat generated. We know heat and pressure can change and alter decay rates. Right. And even the evolutionists will admit, yes, heat and pressure can alter decay rates in very special circumstances. Well, okay. Yeah, the global flood would have been a very special circumstance. Okay. And this could have resulted in the necessary accelerating of the decay rate. So why don't we see this as a common occurrence? It's because we've only ever had one worldwide flood. We've only ever had one special creation event where God essentially spoke the universe into existence, okay? So not only that is you've got all of these lines of evidence from, you know, the rate project that are essentially ignored, where you've now got carbon-14 in coal, carbon-14 in oil, carbon-14 in fossilized wood, all indicating thousands of years and not millions to billions. Carbon-14 in diamonds, okay? And all of the objections to these lines of evidence that put a limit on the Earth, including helium and zircon crystals, we've dealt with them on this channel in great detail. Of course, that's not going to stop the critics from constantly repeating them, but the fact that the rate project took rocks of known age, okay, and tested them to all sorts of dating methods, right? Including what? Including isochron dating. Okay, they took samples from the same rock layers and they subjected them to many different dating methods. And what they found was discordant dates, okay, including discordant dates for isochron. So that's why all of this in combination results in the most parsimonious explanation being that decay rates were faster in the past, okay, which means if the decay rate has not been absolutely constant all throughout history, then the clocks we use today based on the uniformitarian assumptions cannot be 100% reliable. Okay, now the dates, yeah, the dates you get, you know, we'd still consider them as being relative, okay, but just not absolute. So yeah, these rocks can come back as millions of years old, but that's just a relative age given what we know about the discordant results, the discordant dates that what we're finding. Because I will point out, and the evolutionists have looked at this as an argument, Matt, where we don't we still get the same or similar relative ages, okay? When it comes to, like, let's say we're looking at rocks down at the bottom of the geological column. Okay, yeah, more or less they give older ages for the most part, the rocks at the top. Okay? Well, that is also what we would expect. And I think you touched on this with Erica in your debate, but that is also what we'd expect based on the Genesis flood. Rocks laid down early in the flood should give what, Matt? Well, it's older ages than the rocks at the top or at the end of the flood, because the dates being derived from these dating methods are what? They're relative. They're not absolute. And this is all based on a massive, overwhelming number of lines of evidence from C14, from helium, from radio halos, from fission tracks, okay, from all of these lines of evidence that suggest the dating methods are unreliable, okay, but it's a red herring, Matt, because, well, Matt, okay, given all of that, what about the heat? What about the radiation that would have killed Noah? Well, I'll say this, Matt, and you're going to like this, brother, is they want to say that, you know, Adam, Eve, their descendants, Noah, you know, they couldn't have existed because the earth would have been as hot as the sun and they would have been melted away. Okay. Is that the case? No, because guess what? We have the most direct way to determine ancestry, which is genetics, is what's inherited sperm and egg, Matt. And what do we know from genetics? Well, genetics has confirmed what? The Tower of Babel. It's confirmed a literal Adam and Eve. It's confirmed the 8 people coming off of the ark. So guess what? We have the genetic related data, which nobody can deal with. I mean, look at dodgeball, pseudoscience man Dan. You know, the poor guy, he's insecure. He thinks we care that Team Dodgeball don't like us. Well, you know what? I wouldn't like us either if we were evolutionists and we were just demolishing all their arguments. I mean, damage control Dan was brought in for what? Damage control. Yet, in a year, we've seen no testable predictions. We've seen nothing but misrepresentations and straw man arguments. So, that being said, Matt, we have an evolutionary biologist like Damage Control Dan who's failed miserably to address all the amazing number of lines of evidence suggesting a literal Adam and Eve, a literal Noah, the Tower of Babel event. So, guess what? Those events were real, which means, Matt, the earth was not as hot as the sun, or else we wouldn't have those lines of evidence. So,
Right.
sorry to say it, if you want to look to the heat problem as your number one argument, you better know a thing or two about genetics and biology, which confirms the people that you say couldn't have existed because the earth was as hot as the sun. Guess what? They existed. We have the direct lines of evidence confirming that. So, go ahead. That was a rant, but go ahead.
No, that was good. That was good. Yeah, they're too willing to bypass everything and hyper focus on one area, right? They're pretending they're a forensic investigator, and there's evidence everywhere, but they're just looking for that one piece that can get their victim off, right? You know, they're like, oh man, OJ with the glove, right? It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Come on, man. It fits like if it's perfect. You're just making your hand pretend like it doesn't fit. Everything else fits. You're just desperately grasping at straws. You know what I mean? Like, what do we see? Why would something like when we test rocks, what do we test? We test their radiometric elements, right? Because that's what we can see have a constant half-life after they've been cooled. So what happens? Why do deeper layers have older dates? Well, think about it. What's uranium? Is that a heavy element or is that really light? Would you expect that to be on the top or the bottom? It's heavy, so it would sink down, wouldn't it? And guess what? It does. We find uranium, which is tested to be the oldest, at the bottom because it's the heaviest. What does water do? Well, water is a solvent. It's going to drop it down. The more water, the deeper it's going to be. You're going to push that element down into the ground. It's just the way it is. So their arguments are actually pretty weak once they get lined up with really what's going on. That's why they're hyper-focusing on one argument. They found something they can use to argue with and ignore everything else because, you know, the geneticists have already shown, yeah, there's definitely a mitochondrial Eve and there's definitely a mitochondrial Adam. There's no doubt about it. When, well, you know, that's subjective, you know, because they're using their evolutionary bias, right? They're using the phylogenetic method. So they're like, yeah, just push it back 200,000 years. They have to admit there was a bottleneck, but they don't want to admit it was anywhere near our time period. And they definitely don't want to admit that Adam and Eve lived anywhere near each other. But guess what? They didn't, because Y chromosome Adam is Noah. And how come the mutation rates, when we look at the high quality, show it goes only back a few thousand years?
Right.
Evolutionists need it to be a minimum of 200,000. They can't get anywhere near it. So the evidence is just destroyed from them. That's why they're hyper focusing on the heat problem. And they don't want to answer like, well, the limestone has a problem in their model, right? It would eat up all the carbon in the atmosphere. Nothing could live to form the 20% of all Earth's sedimentary layers being limestone. So if the entire 20% of all of Earth's sedimentary layers are limestone, well, how did it form? They have to invoke perfect conditions for hundreds of millions of years to create all the limestone that we see now on Earth. The only problem with that is you need absolute perfect conditions to form limestone. You don't get that without absolute perfect conditions. Now, they're invoking uniformitarianism, but they don't invoke that it would have been absolutely perfect to form limestone. We don't see that today, but yet they invoke that the world was very similar in the past as it is today. That's what uniformitarianism is. So if we only see a slight amount of limestone being made today, they can't say, well, in the past it was, it was exactly the same and taking millions of years. Well, if that was the case and it was producing massive amounts of limestone in the world, well, you have a carbon problem now. So they ignore the problems. They come at us and say, you guys, you have a problem with this. You guys have a problem with the light. It's like, wait, you have the horizon problem with light travel. Why are you pointing at our problem when you have a worse problem? It just doesn't make sense. They're just trying to push the blame onto you because they know that their model doesn't have an answer. So they're hoping yours doesn't have one either. I have a solution to the heat problem I put on my channel. I was like, here's your solution to when the tectonic movement is creating the friction and causing heat. And it also deals with a meteor impact that caused it. So you have two massive components of heat being generated that might have started the flood and then activated and been gone through the flood, and it's nothing but math. It's nothing but the numbers for everybody.
Right. Well, I was going to say that real quick. I'll stop you and then keep going. Is there are people still in the chat, where's the numbers? Well, you just put out a video that actually shows a solution based on numbers. Okay. And as far as I know, that video is a very powerful video. It's not perfect, but I did not see in that video where they are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but where we were talking about earlier how the pre-flood world was the perfect battery to suck up and absorb most of this heat, right? Which we talked about with Joseph Hubbard a few weeks ago. I don't know if that was even accounted for.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. Right.
Yeah.
So imagine you add that in, right? Add in the hypercane model. Add in. Yeah. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
No, I just said add a canopy. Add limestone formation. Add oil. Add carb. You've got multiple outlets for things that absorb heat. You have the ocean itself. I mean, there's multiple things, and we don't have to say the radioactive elements were formed like in Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. They could have been created at the very beginning. And they existed up until the flood, and the flood washed these elements onto the continents. That's why 90% of the elements, these radioactive elements, are on the continents today.
Well, with Walt Brown's model, you've got the creation of these heavier elements, okay, during the flood itself, okay? What results, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe you can explain it a little better than me, what results is something called cold repacking, where there's a canceling out effect where that heat is absorbed through the process. Is it right? And we've seen this in real-time experiment. So, there's a model. Did I represent that accurately, brother?
Yeah, it's adiabatic. So they, as they fission and they hit together through a Z-pinch, the heat is absorbed, and the machines that actually do this using lightning are cold to the touch. So they're standing in a room that's generating so much heat that it's creating super heavy elements to form, and they're just standing there, right? So clearly it can be done without massive problems because we're literally doing it. But now what would be happening is if that was under 60 miles of granitic crust, I would think Noah would be pretty safe, don't you think? If it can happen in the same room as somebody with a metal machine. I'm pretty sure 60 miles of concrete can. We know that when we stand underneath a bridge that's made of concrete with our cell phone, the reception doesn't work very good, and concrete blocks all ultraviolet light. So if it can do that with just being under a freeway overpass, I would imagine 60 miles, like Walt Brown's theory has it, it's pretty safe.
Great responses. And earlier we had a critic who said, and here's the thing, how healthy disagreements and discussion on these important issues is important, but don't straw man the model. Don't misrepresent the model. Don't come up with a mathematical equation as to why the heat problem essentially destroys the possibility of a global flood if you're not using or starting with accurate assumptions. For example, assumptions pertaining to the pre-flood world and what it consisted of. Because my question to that critic was, explain to me how, tell me why, empirically, the pre-flood world and what we know about it and how it would have acted as the perfect battery to suck up and absorb most of this heat. Explain to me why that's not possible, and there was no response. So a lot of times what you are going to get is what we've been getting is an active rejection and denial of the lines of evidence directly in the rocks, the scars, the damage, that suggests accelerated decay has happened. Okay. The same talking points, repeated talking points to rescue the old age model from the evidence that we see pertaining to carbon in diamonds, C14 in fossilized wood, C14 in coal, for example. So I'm just looking at the chat, so I was a little distracted. People are saying thank you, and they're enjoying it, so I appreciate it. We still got 40 people in here. We did say we were going to go for about an hour. We got a super chat here from Alpha Beta, says creation is a fact. Amen. Thanks for the support. Raymond, once again, says a super sticker, so I appreciate it. Guys, this is a heavy topic. Stay tuned for our next handbook, which is this one's the Independent Origins Handbook. Okay. This was written for non-experts and also just kind of your everyday person. For example, these are the kinds of books that I'll give to my family, give to my parents, where they're not really, they don't need a hardcore technical book, but just a handbook that goes over the, all the lines of evidence that evolutionists use for universal ancestry, how to refute them, and then also present the alternative model. So the next handbook we're going to do is going to also deal with the heat problem. We're going to talk about this even more. And I didn't really make any notes. So, I mean, for now, that's about it. Lots of good shows. And check out Patreon as well. We're going to be working on another couple videos that we're going to be uploading exclusively to Patreon as well. What was it, a couple weeks ago, Matt? You put out an awesome documentary on Genesis and why it needs to be taken as a historical account exclusive to our Patreons. Check out our Goodreads page. It's so funny. On our Goodreads page, I think, Matt, we've got about what, 200 reviews, 300 reviews.
Yeah.
We've got, I think, 2 bad reviews. One from Dodgeball Dan.
Yeah, before he read it.
Yeah, before he read it. So one from Dodgeball Dan, who left an identical bad review as he did to Replacing Darwin. So if he's leaving the same review, it's almost word for word, to Replacing Darwin from Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, who's a genius, and Replacing Darwin's an awesome book. I got it right here. I'll give Dr. Jeanson some free advertising. Then that's a compliment. I'll take it, Dodgeball Dan. I'll take it, Dodgeball Dan. But according to Dodgeball Dan, the most militant evolutionists on YouTube, Team Dodgeball, they don't like us. So, I mean, shut down the ministry. Sorry, Dan. I've got enough friends, okay? He just doesn't like us because after he got absolutely demolished, okay, I demolished him, and I'll confidently say it in my last discussion with him on mitochondrial Eve. No predictions. The guy gives a retrodiction when asked for a prediction. Can't explain why there's so few differences in mitochondrial DNA worldwide, why there's such low variation. Resorts to storytelling. So Godzilla Freak says, there's also that guy pretending to be a member of Team SFT. Which guy is that, brother? Oh, I think there's that Henry guy. He also left a bad review recently. So,
I remember the one. It was the guy that pretended to be Jason.
Oh yes.
A guy that's
probably Dodgeball Dan.
Yeah, Jason, the guy who is authored. I put on the book. I put him as an author of the book. Said the book was horrible. They didn't bother investigating that very good, did they?
Well, Crimson Air, thank you. And Crimson Air always asks good questions and stuff. So especially for, we really I personally, I'm a debate addict. I love getting 2 different views together. I love moderating a debate. I think it's important to be neutral and fair while moderating. Okay. So we do host a lot of debates. Got a ton of debates. I'm working on a really big one between 2 geologists, hopefully in May. So my point is, I think a lot of evolutionists think that we purposely, when it comes to a debate, it's not the most important thing about who, the creation side wants the creation side to just dominate. The evolutionist wants to dominate. I mean, I like a good professional, cordial debate. And that's why we also have a fair Q&A at the end where we can take questions from the audience for the debaters. And definitely check out the McQueen versus Jordan debate. That was a lot of fun. Ton of good questions. I remember Crimson Air had some good questions. So You know, I think that's the important thing to take away from debates. And that's why I personally moderate them fair. You know, back in the day, you had non sequitur show where you'd go on for a debate. Okay. You know, they had Kent on like 5 times, and Kent is always a good show. He gives a lot of views. But what happened? The moderators, for example, Steve McRae, would get involved in the debate, making it like a 2 or 3 on 1 sometimes. No, we don't do that here. It's fair. It's neutral during the debate. It's also why we've had Ken Hovind on 17 times for debates. We posted some of the best debates, I think, on YouTube, with plenty more to come. So just because we're a Young Earth Creation channel, when it comes to the actual debates that we host, you know, we're gonna do it fair. We're gonna make sure it's cordial, it's neutral. It's important to discuss these ideas. So, Crimson Air, that just I don't know why I went on that rant, but he says, "Would you and Matt ever be willing to debate Iron Raw?" The answer is yes. I've tried to set it up in the past on Modern Day Debate, and I don't. Aaron Ra to me is not really updated on the data, because he tried to refute one of our videos before, and he acted dumbfounded from one of my claims when I pointed out the fact that these endogenous retroviruses are now known to be highly functional, okay, and serve essential purposes in many different biological systems. And he acted dumbfounded. He wasn't even aware of it. So I don't know. You know, I'd love to press him on some of our arguments that you'll find in this book. I don't really think his phylogeny challenge is totally based on a straw man misrepresentation. Okay, assuming that we wouldn't also expect some type of hierarchy in the biological world. I mean, what a straw man to say that we would not also expect that humans would be more similar to some creatures like the chimps and less similar to other creatures like a dog or a bacteria. A hierarchy is natural. Hierarchy is natural. Now let's look to the differentiating lines of evidence that we focus on, Matt. For example, yesterday, that Henry guy, he was saying, "Oh, I read your book." He's the one that left the second bad review with Dodgeball Dan. Seems like a nice guy. I think I'll debate him in the future. But he was like, "Oh, I found all these errors in your book, easily debunkable." So I took an argument on like page 3. This is this book right here. Special creation. So I talk about how when you consider overall architecture, gene content with the Y chromosome, okay, the uniparentally inherited DNA compartment, when they sequence the chimpanzee Y chromosome, and you consider overall architecture, gene content, well, the chimpanzee Y chromosome is less than 35% dissimilar to the human Y chromosome. So I asked them, well, how do you explain that according to your model? Oh, I'm going to have to go back and look into it. Yeah. So apparently he destroyed the book, left a bad review, but he can't even address, you know, one argument on page 3, which isn't even a really that, you know, difficult one. I don't know. What are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, I think I was there, and you said because he left a bad review on mine, and you go, which one of Matt's books have you read? He goes, well, none of them. So,
right.
Okay. So there goes that debate with him. I don't know. Pretty funny. Oh, by the way, I saw another question up here. What is the highest temperature that Earth got? And what people always ask, and I don't know the answer. Well, I can attempt to answer. I would say that there's no possible way the flood could have really gone above 2,300 degrees, and that's with dry granite, and so under the ocean, probably not much hotter than 1,260. And the reason why is because when granite melts, it doesn't form back into granite again. It stays as something called rhyolite, and it looks entirely different. So if granite was underneath the earth and it's the main crust of the earth and it's melting everywhere from heat, then there wouldn't be granite anywhere on earth. But there's granite everywhere. So obviously all the granite did not melt. So there's no possible way that granite underneath the ocean surpassed 1,260 degrees. So it's somewhere underneath that. As an exact temperature, I can't really give you. It's not my specialty. We like genetics more here, but I had to give you an answer. So
good. Very good. So the last thing I'll say to the critics, show us why. Show us the numbers why the pre-flood world with proper assumptions, okay, would not be the perfect battery to absorb a lot of the heat. Then deal with the direct lines of evidence that confirm independent origins, that confirm a global flood, that confirm accelerated decay, and quit hiding out in that little corner, their safe place with the so-called heat problem. It's been dealt with. Okay, and if you don't like it, well, you still got a lot of direct lines of evidence you have to deal with. That still destroys your position. So anyways, I think we're going to wind down here because we're going on an hour and a half, and our brother John Maddox, Logical, Plausible, Probable, go subscribe to him. Check him out if you haven't yet seen him. I believe he's having a open mic, and I see Jordan in the chat. Again, thanks for being here, Jordan. Once again, I've been saying great debate. Everybody check it out. And yeah, check this video out, Jordan. And if you want to deal with some of the points or arguments, go ahead. So that being said, guys, check the upcoming live stream section. Tons of good debates, discussions, interviews. Be here on the 7th and 8th because we've got 2 top flood researchers, Mike Ord on the 7th, Sal Jardine on the 8th. We're going to deal with it all. Bring your questions to the experts. We're going to have some fun. It's going to be a 2-day global flood event, all things global flood. So anyways, guys, we'll see you Wednesday for the debate on slavery. Head on over to Logical, Plausible, Probable's channel. I think he's having a open mic night or something fun as usual. And Matt, I'll hand it over to you, brother, for some last words before we shut her down.
Oh, sure. All right. I was going to post in the community for everybody. That is a video on my channel for everybody that wants to see the numbers, if you would like. Also, if you want, make sure to go to here. I'm sorry, hold on one second. And make sure to also watch this video by Brian Nichols. It's time-stamped for you, I believe. 12 minutes, I think, is where you want to start with that one. Exactly on 12 minutes. Wait, I didn't share the right one. That's my own video. My bad. Here. Okay. That is the correct timestamp, and that's for answering the limestone formation. And he talks about how heat was used to chemically make limestone, how it wasn't a biological process. Of course, you can rewind it and watch the entire 18-minute video, but I found the exact point where he brings up how the heat was actually used as the benefit of the flood and why we see the layers of limestone that we see based on the flood geology of the CPT model. So now you guys have things to look at for both. And you have the friction heat dealt with on my channel, and you have the limestone being dealt with on Brian Nichols' video. So I hope that would be good, since we're not going to play it here. And see you guys over on John's channel. And that was right here. Possible. There's a link for that as well. And there it is. And I am out.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you. The chat's just cracking me up how we were fashionably late. Standing for Truth and Matt, man, we arrive neither late nor early. We arrive and start precisely when we mean to. So anyways, guys, God bless. We'll see you on John Maddox's channel for another epic, I'm sure, open mic night. He never has any real challengers, so it's getting to the point where Raw Matt and myself may just have to pretend to be evolutionists just to give him a bit of a challenge, because there ain't no challenge coming from Speed of Sound's satire channel over there, and Team Dodgeball. You know, they've given up, so we'll pretend to be evolutionists. So Angelica says, thanks, guys. Great rebuttal to the heat problem. Very helpful and informative. Looks like I will be reviewing this video sometime in the future. God bless. God bless you as well. God bless. God bless you all. Honesty Angel, Godzilla Freak, Jungle Jargon, Redefined Living, SFT, and Matt Man are out.